The massive alien ship screamed through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star, its metal hull glowing white-hot as it tore through the clouds above Montana. Inside the cockpit, Karath gripped the controls with claws that could slice through steel, his dragon-like face twisted in pain as emergency alarms blared around him. His obsidian scales, once the pride of the Astrian Imperial Guard, were now cracked and bleeding a strange blue liquid. The battle above Jupiter's moons had been a disaster. 3 of his squadron's ships destroyed, and his own vessel crippled beyond repair. Now he was falling toward a primitive world that his people barely considered worth studying. The ship hit the forest floor with the force of a meteor, carving a burning trench through ancient pine trees. Metal screamed against rock as the vessel tumbled end over end before finally coming to rest in a clearing, smoke pouring from its shattered hull. Karath crawled from the wreckage on hands and knees, his powerful legs refusing to support his weight. Every breath felt like fire in his lungs. The alien air of this backward planet burned his throat, and his internal organs, designed for the high radiation environment of his homeworld, were slowly shutting down. He had maybe hours to live, maybe less. 8-year-old Damon Riley was supposed to be helping his Aunt Maya gather firewood behind their cabin, but the thunderous crash that shook the entire valley had other plans for his afternoon. While Maya rushed inside to call the authorities about what she assumed was a plane crash, Damon grabbed his backpack and headed toward the column of black smoke rising from the forest. The boy moved through the trees with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. He'd lived in these woods his whole life, knew every trail and hiding spot. But nothing could have prepared him for what he found in that burned clearing. The creature lying among the twisted metal was like something from his favorite fantasy movies, but this was no special effect. 7 feet of muscle and scales, with a long serpentine neck and eyes that glowed like amber lanterns in the fading daylight. Wings, torn and bleeding, stretched from its back like the remnants of a dark angel. Most kids would have run screaming. Damon took a step closer. The dragon's massive head turned toward him, those burning eyes focusing with obvious effort. Karath expected the small human to flee or attack or call for others of its kind. Instead, the boy simply stood there, head tilted to one side, studying him with innocent concern. "You okay, mister?" Damon asked, as if he were talking to a neighbor who'd fallen off a ladder. Karath's universal translator, damaged but still functioning, processed the words. In 300 years of military service across dozens of worlds, no being had ever asked about his well-being with such genuine worry. Most species either cowered in terror or immediately tried to capture or kill him. The alien tried to speak, but only a weak hiss emerged from his throat. His forked tongue flicked out, tasting the strange new air, seeking moisture his dying body desperately needed. Damon saw the gesture and understood immediately. Without hesitation, he unslung his backpack and pulled out a plastic water bottle, the kind his aunt always made him carry on hikes. He approached slowly, the way he'd seen people approach wounded animals on nature shows. "Here," he said, holding out the bottle. "You look thirsty." Karath stared at the offering in disbelief. This tiny creature, barely the size of his forearm, was giving aid to something that could crush him without effort. The boy couldn't possibly know that Karath's species viewed humans as little more than clever insects, yet here he was, offering help to a complete stranger who happened to be a 7-foot alien predator. With trembling claws, Karath accepted the water bottle and drank deeply. The cool liquid soothed his burning throat and gave his failing systems a small boost of energy. For the first time since the crash, he didn't feel like death was seconds away. "Better?" Damon asked, settling cross-legged in the dirt beside the massive alien as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Karath managed a weak nod, studying the boy's open, trusting face. According to everything the Astrian Empire had taught him, humans were violent, primitive creatures driven by fear and aggression. They were supposed to shoot first and ask questions later, especially when confronted with something unknown and potentially dangerous. Yet this small human had seen a being in need and responded with kindness instead of violence. It was a concept so foreign to Karath's military mindset that he struggled to process it. In the Empire, weakness was punished, and showing mercy to an enemy was considered the gravest of failures. But there was nothing weak about the boy's actions, Karath realized. It took courage to approach the unknown with compassion instead of weapons. The next morning, Damon woke up before sunrise, his mind racing with thoughts of the incredible creature he'd discovered. He grabbed his backpack and quietly slipped out of the cabin while his Aunt Maya was still sleeping. The forest was cool and misty, filled with the sounds of birds welcoming the new day. When he reached the clearing, Karath was awake but barely moving. The alien's breathing was shallow and his amber eyes seemed dimmer than before. Damon could see that the blue liquid seeping from the creature's wounds had spread, staining the ground around him. "Hey there," Damon whispered, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "I brought you some stuff." From his backpack, he pulled out a thermos of hot soup his aunt had made for dinner, 2 peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in aluminum foil, and a large bottle of water. He also had some bandages and antiseptic cream he'd taken from the bathroom medicine cabinet. Karath watched in amazement as the small human laid out these offerings like gifts. The warm soup smelled strange but pleasant, and the sandwiches, while unfamiliar, provided nutrients his body desperately needed. More importantly, the boy's actions showed a level of care that Karath had never experienced, even from his own kind. "My name's Damon," the boy said, sitting cross-legged beside the alien. "What should I call you?" The damaged translator crackled as Karath formed the words. "I am Karath," he managed, his voice like distant thunder. "Karath," Damon repeated, trying to get the pronunciation right. "That's a cool name. Are you from space?" The directness of the question surprised Karath. Most species he'd encountered either pretended not to understand what he was or became hostile once they realized he wasn't from their world. This human child simply accepted his alien nature as if it were the most normal thing possible. Over the next few days, Damon established a routine. Every morning and evening, he would sneak away to bring food, water, and whatever medical supplies he could find. He cleaned Karatha's wounds with gentle hands, applied bandages with the careful precision of someone determined not to cause pain, and sat talking to the alien for hours. Damon told Karath about his life, his school, his friends, and his dreams of becoming a veterinarian so he could help injured animals. He talked about his Aunt Maya, who had raised him since his parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. He shared his fears, his hopes, and his simple joy in discovering something wonderful and mysterious. Karath found himself looking forward to these visits more than he'd ever looked forward to anything. The boy's innocent questions opened new ways of thinking about the universe. When Damon asked why Karatha's people had been fighting in space, the alien struggled to explain concepts of territorial expansion and resource acquisition that suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless. "But why can't everyone just share?" Damon asked with the simple logic that only children possess. "There's lots of space up there, right?" The question haunted Karath. His people had spent centuries conquering worlds, enslaving populations, and strip mining entire star systems. They told themselves it was necessary for survival, for the glory of the empire, for the natural order of strong dominating weak. But faced with this boy's genuine confusion about why beings couldn't simply coexist peacefully, Karath began to question everything he'd been taught. On the 4th day, Damon arrived with news that worried Karath deeply. "My aunt's been asking where I disappear to all the time," the boy said, unwrapping another sandwich. "I think she's getting suspicious. She even mentioned calling the Forest Service about that weird crash." Karath knew that discovery by adult humans would likely mean capture, experimentation, or worse. His people's intelligence reports on Earth suggested that while humans were primitive, they were also paranoid and aggressive toward anything they didn't understand. But Damon had a different perspective on human nature. "Don't worry," the boy said with complete confidence. "If she finds out about you, I'll just explain that you're hurt and need help. Aunt Maya's really nice. She helps injured animals all the time. She even nursed a baby owl back to health last winter." The idea that humans might show kindness to an alien was so foreign to Karatha's worldview that he couldn't process it. In the Asturian Empire, different species were either conquered, enslaved, or eliminated. The concept of interspecies compassion simply didn't exist in their culture. Yet here was this small human, offering friendship and protection to a being who belonged to a military force that would gladly destroy his entire planet. Damon's trust wasn't naive, it was revolutionary. It suggested that humans possessed something Karatha's advanced, powerful civilization had lost long ago. As the alien's strength slowly returned under the boy's care, he realized he was learning more about the true nature of strength and courage from an 8-year-old human than he had in 3 centuries of military training. Maya Collins had always been good at reading people, especially her nephew. After raising Damon for 3 years, she could tell when he was hiding something. The boy had been disappearing for hours every day, coming back with dirt under his fingernails and a secretive smile on his face. When she asked where he'd been, he'd just say he was exploring the woods, but something in his eyes told her there was more to the story. On Thursday morning, she decided to follow him. Damon moved through the forest with purpose, carrying his bulging backpack and walking quickly toward the area where that strange crash had happened days earlier. Maya stayed well behind, using the tracking skills her father had taught her as a child. When they reached a burned clearing filled with twisted metal, she expected to find the wreckage of a small plane or maybe a meteorite. She did not expect to find her 8-year-old nephew sitting next to a 7-foot alien creature, carefully cleaning wounds on its scaled arm while chatting about his math homework. Maya's first instinct was to grab Damon and run. Her second was to reach for the rifle she always carried in the woods. But something made her pause and actually look at what was happening. The massive creature was lying very still, letting the boy tend to its injuries with infinite patience. Its glowing amber eyes were focused on Damon's face with an expression that looked almost grateful. "Damon," she called softly, stepping into the clearing with her hands visible. "What's going on here?" The boy looked up with a mixture of guilt and excitement. "Aunt Maya. This is Karath. He's hurt really bad, but he's getting better. He's from space, and he's really nice, and he likes peanut butter sandwiches." Karatha's massive head turned toward the adult human, expecting fear or aggression. Instead, he saw a woman in her 30s with intelligent brown eyes and calloused hands, studying him with the careful assessment of someone who'd seen her share of emergencies. Maya had served as a combat medic in Afghanistan before coming home to raise her sister's son. She treated everything from gunshot wounds to snake bites, and she could recognize a patient in need when she saw one. The alien's breathing was labored, his scales had lost their luster, and the blue substance seeping from his wounds suggested serious internal damage. "Okay," she said, setting down her rifle and approaching slowly. "Let me take a look." Over the next hour, Maya examined Karath with professional competence, asking Damon to translate when the alien's damaged communication device failed. She cleaned and properly dressed his wounds, checked his vital signs as best she could, and determined that while he was stable, he needed more help than a first aid kit could provide. "We need to move him," she told Damon. "Somewhere safe where he can heal properly." The old barn on the edge of their property hadn't been used in years, but it was dry, hidden from view, and large enough to house their unusual patient. With Karath moving slowly but steadily, they managed to relocate him under cover of darkness. Word traveled fast in their small mountain community. By the next evening, Maya's neighbor Tyler Washington had noticed the unusual activity around the Collins property. Tyler was a retired Army sergeant who'd moved to Montana for the peace and quiet, but old habits die hard. When he saw Maya and Damon making mysterious trips to the barn with medical supplies and food, he decided to investigate. Tyler approached the barn expecting to find an injured hiker or maybe someone Maya was helping off the books. He did not expect to find an alien the size of a small truck lying on a bed of hay, reading one of Damon's comic books with obvious fascination. "Well," Tyler said after a long moment of stunned silence, "I guess that explains the weird lights in the sky last week." Instead of panicking, Tyler recognized a fellow soldier in need. Karatha's bearing, even injured and exhausted, carried the unmistakable mark of someone who'd seen combat. The alien's respectful nod when Tyler entered the barn spoke of military discipline and honor that transcended species. "Marines?" Tyler asked, pointing to himself. Karatha's translator crackled. "Imperial Guard. Reconnaissance." "Tough assignment," Tyler replied, settling onto a hay bale. "Bad landing?" "Enemy fire. Ship destroyed. Squadron, lost." The conversation that followed was mostly silent, two warriors sharing the understanding that comes from surviving battles others didn't. Tyler didn't need explanations about military hierarchies or the politics of interstellar conflict. He understood duty, sacrifice, and what it meant to be far from home with nowhere left to go. Within days, their small group had developed routines. Maya handled medical care and made sure Karath was eating properly. Damon continued bringing entertainment and companionship, teaching the alien about human culture through cartoons, books, and endless questions. Tyler provided security and helped strengthen the barn to better accommodate their massive guest. Karath found himself experiencing emotions he'd never felt before. These humans had turned their lives upside down to care for someone they barely knew, someone who represented a potential threat to their entire species. They asked for nothing in return except his company and occasional help with Damon's science projects. The alien began to understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons, but their capacity for connection across impossible differences. 3 weeks had passed since the crash when the night sky above Montana began to glow with an eerie green light. Karath was in the barn, helping Damon with a school project about the solar system, when his head suddenly snapped up. His amber eyes widened with something that looked like fear. "They have found me," he whispered, his translator crackling with static. The massive shadow that blotted out the stars was nothing like the sleek craft Karath had piloted. This was a warship, bristling with weapons and scanning equipment, designed to project power and intimidate entire planets. Maya rushed into the barn, Tyler close behind, both of them staring up through the open door at the impossible sight hovering above their property. "Friends of yours?" Tyler asked, his hand instinctively moving toward the hunting rifle leaning against the wall. Karatha's expression was grim. "War Commander Vex. My former superior. He has come to retrieve me and complete my mission." The ship descended with mechanical precision, landing in the field behind the barn with barely a whisper of displaced air. A ramp lowered, and 6 figures emerged, their scales gleaming like polished obsidian in the artificial light. They moved in perfect formation, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats with predatory focus. The leader was even larger than Karath, with scars covering his snout and arms that spoke of countless battles. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Scout Karath," Vex called in the harsh language of their people. "You will present yourself immediately for debriefing and medical evaluation." Karath stepped out of the barn slowly, his head held high despite his lingering injuries. Behind him, Damon pressed close to Maya's side while Tyler positioned himself protectively in front of them both. "War Commander," Karath replied formally. "I am prepared to return to duty." Vex's burning gaze swept over the 3 humans, his expression twisting with disgust. "Explain why you have allowed these inferior creatures to contaminate you with their presence." The casual dismissal of his friends as inferior beings ignited something dangerous in Karatha's chest. Over the past weeks, he had watched Damon's curiosity and kindness, Maya's selfless care, and Tyler's quiet strength. To hear them described as lesser creatures felt like a physical blow. "They provided medical assistance when my ship was destroyed," Karath said carefully. "I was unable to reach the beacon due to my injuries." "Yet you could have eliminated them to prevent discovery," Vex observed, his tone suggesting this would have been the preferred course of action. "Instead, you chose to live among them like some domesticated creature. The Empire is disappointed in your weakness." Damon stepped forward before anyone could stop him, his young voice carrying clearly across the field. "He's not weak. He's hurt, and we're helping him get better. That's what you do when someone needs help." The alien warriors turned their attention to the small human with expressions of cold amusement. To them, Damon was nothing more than a talking animal, barely worthy of notice except as a curiosity. "The larvae speaks," one of Vex's subordinates sneered. "How amusing that it believes its opinion matters." Tyler's hand tightened on his rifle, but Maya placed a restraining touch on his arm. She knew that any aggressive move would end badly for all of them. Vex ignored the boy entirely, focusing on Karath with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Your mission remains incomplete, Scout. You were sent to assess this world's defenses and resource potential. The Empire requires your full report before we begin extraction operations." The word extraction sent a chill through the small group of humans. They might not understand alien military terminology, but the implications were clear. Vex wasn't just here to rescue Karath, he was here to begin the systematic destruction of everything they held dear. "I need more time to complete proper reconnaissance," Karath said, stalling for time while his mind raced through possibilities. "The humans are more complex than our intelligence suggested. A hasty assessment could lead to costly mistakes." Vex's scarred features twisted into what might have been a smile. "Complexity? From these primitive creatures? You have been among them too long, Scout. Your judgment has been compromised by proximity to inferior beings." He gestured toward his subordinates, who began advancing on the barn with weapons drawn. "No matter. We will conduct our own evaluation, beginning with the elimination of potential witnesses." That's when Karath made his choice. Stepping between the alien warriors and his human friends, he spread his wings wide despite the pain from his still healing injuries. His amber eyes blazed with determination as he faced down his former commander. "I cannot allow that," he said quietly. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Vex's expression shifted from disappointment to cold fury as he realized that his subordinate was choosing to protect the very beings the Empire considered expendable. "You would betray your own kind for these creatures?" Vex demanded, his voice rising to a roar that echoed across the valley. Behind Karath, Damon reached out and took his scaled hand in both of his small human ones, a gesture of trust and solidarity that spoke louder than any words. "Yes," Karath replied without hesitation. "I would." The tension in the field was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Vex stood frozen, his scarred face twisting between rage and disbelief as he processed what his former scout had just said. In 3,000 years of Imperial history, no Astrian warrior had ever chosen alien beings over their own kind. "You have lost your mind," Vex snarled, his claws extending as battle instincts took over. The contamination runs deeper than I thought. But Karath didn't back down. The weeks of kindness from these humans had changed something fundamental inside him. When he looked at Damon's trusting face, Maya's protective stance, and Tyler's quiet courage, he saw everything the Empire had taught him to despise. Yet these supposedly weak creatures had shown him more genuine loyalty in 3 weeks than he'd received in 3 centuries of military service. Perhaps, Karath replied calmly. But I have finally learned what true strength looks like. The first shot came from one of Vex's subordinates, a plasma bolt that would have cut Karath in half if Tyler hadn't tackled him sideways. The retired Marine rolled behind the barn's water trough, pulling Maya and Damon with him as more energy blasts scorched the air above their heads. Stay down, Tyler shouted, checking his hunting rifle. And whatever happens, don't try to be heroes. But heroes, Karath had learned, weren't made by choice. They were made by circumstances that demanded someone stand up when standing up seemed impossible. The alien scout launched himself skyward on wings that still protested from his crash injuries. He couldn't match Vex warriors in a straight fight, but he had something they didn't: intimate knowledge of their ship's weaknesses and a desperate need to protect the only family he'd ever truly known. The battle in the sky above the Montana Valley was brief but spectacular. Karath used every trick he'd learned in 3 centuries of warfare, leading the Imperial troops away from the barn and toward the mountains where their energy weapons would be less effective. But he was still injured, still outnumbered, and his enemies weren't holding back. A plasma blast caught his left wing, sending him tumbling toward the rocky peaks. As he struggled to regain control, Vex's voice echoed through his damaged communicator. "Surrender now, and I will make their deaths quick," the war commander offered. "Continue this foolishness, and I will ensure they suffer for your betrayal." That threat was Vex's fatal mistake. It revealed exactly how little he understood about what motivated his former subordinate. Instead of surrendering, Karath changed tactics entirely. Using his knowledge of Imperial systems, he began broadcasting on emergency frequencies, sending out detailed reports about Earth's advanced defensive capabilities and hidden military installations. To any Imperial ship monitoring communications, it would sound like a planet-wide alert system activating in response to their presence. More importantly, he began uploading false data about Earth's resources and strategic value, painting the planet as a worthless ball of rock protected by technology that would make conquest too costly to pursue. The deception worked better than he'd dared hope. Within minutes, Vex received new orders from the Imperial Fleet Command, directing him to withdraw immediately and reclassify Earth as a low-priority target not worth the expenditure of military resources. But Vex wasn't stupid. He realized what Karath had done, and his fury was nuclear. "You think this changes anything?" the war commander roared as his ship's engines powered up for departure. "You think your lies will protect these creatures forever?" "No," Karath replied, landing heavily in the field where his human friends waited. "But it will give them time to grow stronger. And humans, I have learned, make excellent use of time." The Imperial ship disappeared into the star-filled sky, taking with it any chance Karath had of returning to his old life. He was officially a traitor now, exiled from his people and marked for death if he ever encountered another Imperial vessel. But as Damon ran toward him with a huge grin and Maya approached with her medical kit already open, Karath realized he didn't care about what he'd lost. What he'd gained was infinitely more valuable. Years passed. Karath became Uncle K to Damon and his friends, the mysterious relative who helped with science projects and told incredible stories about distant worlds. Maya's neighbors learned to accept the strange guest who helped with heavy lifting and never missed a community barbecue. Tyler and Karath spent long evenings on the porch, 2 old soldiers sharing war stories and watching the stars. Sometimes they'd spot unusual lights moving across the sky, but none ever came close to Earth again. Damon grew up knowing that the universe was vast and full of wonders, but also that home was wherever people chose to love and protect each other. When he eventually became a doctor, specializing in emergency medicine, he always remembered the lesson his alien friend had taught him about the power of simple kindness. And sometimes, late at night, Karath would look up at the stars and smile. The Empire had taught him that strength came from conquest and domination. But a human boy with a cup of water had shown him that true strength came from choosing compassion over cruelty, even when that choice cost everything you thought you valued. It was, he reflected, the best trade he'd ever made.